Yeah, that's probably it.
Cool. Right. Yes. Hello, everybody. Today we are doing part 5, which is the final part. Although we may, return at some point because this has been a lot of fun. But in theory, the final part of our crafting serial fiction little videos. And today we're attempting to talk about getting paid. And in the title of this, we had getting paid in theory in brackets because, if as writers collectively we'd figured out how to make money from writing fiction, we'd all be a lot happier. Some people have figured it out, like some really famous people. And then you've got people at the bottom who are not making any money. And then you've got everyone in the middle who's just sort of prodding at things and just trying to figure out what's going on. And no one really knows. So that's where we're coming from. Yes. So yeah, how's your week been, Sally?
Good. It's been good. It's significantly less warm outside, which helps. I feel like
Yes.
I'm getting my brain back, which is useful.
Yeah. The UK is no longer melting into the floor, although I think it may start doing that again next week. So
Blech.
I'm making the most of not being a sweaty mess. So when it comes to getting paid for doing writing, and specifically, the context of this series is serial fiction, because obviously there's all sorts of ways you can get paid for doing writing, like being a copywriter or working in comms and marketing, and there's all those kind of more day job ways of using writing skills. Obviously, being a journalist is a way, but what we're looking at is specifically fiction and serial fiction. So you're writing your serials, you're putting them out into the world. What are the options for how to monetize that, and to do it in a way that doesn't feel icky and hopefully is good for you and good for readers and all that kind of thing. And I think to set expectations, which I think we've done all the way through this series, in terms of just trying to build a readership generally. This is not a hang on, let me say this right. It's not a get rich quick scheme. If somebody wants to go and make loads of money, then writing fiction is generally not the way to do it. And writing serial fiction on the internet is also probably not the way to go. But that doesn't mean there aren't options. So what we're going to do is go through some of the options today that we've been poking at. And I think one thing to figure out is what people mean by kind of success in this area. What are people actually looking for? I don't know if you had any kind of thoughts on that up front, before anyone even gets into it, how they should think about this, just so that they don't drive themselves too crazy.
Yeah, I think my ethos on all of this, and especially when it comes to money, is that your guiding light is going to be your own particular goals, not the things people say you should want or what other people are doing or whatever. It should be about what is it that you want out of this experience, because there are ways to make money. But every way to make money comes with benefits and drawbacks, sacrifices in time and resources. You might have to spend some money to make money. There are all these different pieces to it. And so it's about deciding kind of upfront. I mean, obviously you can modify as you go, but deciding kind of upfront, how much time and energy am I willing to put into this if what I want to get out of it is money on the other side. And so I want to say that up front, partially because I know there's a lot of people who will come into this live stream and listen to us talk thinking why does it have to be about money? And it doesn't. I want to be very clear. It does not have to be about money at all. You don't have to write for money if you don't want to. You don't have to seek getting paid if you don't want to. It can be just for the fun of it. It can be just for having the satisfaction of finishing a project. There's all kinds of reasons why we write. But if your goal is to make some money, I'm hoping that we can cover some bases for how that's possible. And that way you're equipped to handle the conversation if and when the question comes up for you. That's my hope with this chat that we're going to have. So
Yeah, that makes sense. And to add to your list of resources, you said like time and effort goes into any tactic where you're trying to make anything of anything, including trying to make money. I think the other resource, just to bear in mind, which is slightly fluffier, but is like your soul.
yeah.
um, like how much of your soul are you willing to spend in order to make money? Because like you're saying, there are things you can do, there are levers you can pull, which in a cynical way can make money online. So, for example, on Substack in newsletter land, one of the best ways to make money, it appears, is to like do a course where you tell other writers how to make money. And you don't have to ever write anything yourself. You don't have to like demonstrate that you're an author or anything. You just do a course and it's like, here's how you make like 800,000 in a year. If you follow my course. And then there's lots of people who apparently will sign up to these things, and the course creator makes loads of money. So, you can do that. Maybe we're doing that by doing this video. I don't know. Hopefully not. But that's the thing. Like if you want to really monetize it and go all in on that, you can go and do that. And there's various dodgy tactics you can employ along the way. We're not going to be talking about that kind of stuff. We want to try and figure out like how can you maybe make a bit of money while still writing fiction and sticking to the stuff you actually wanted to do in the first place, rather than like revenue at all costs, I suppose. Trying to avoid that kind of option. So yes, with all those caveats aside, like we'll talk about a few different ways that you can do this kind of thing. But I think to start off with, the one that makes sense, because we're on Substack, we both use Substack for our newsletter at the moment. We're doing this live stream on Substack, so most people here are probably using Substack in some capacity, is paid subscriptions. So when you start a Substack newsletter, you don't have to have paid subscriptions. You can just put it out for free. Everything's free. Don't even have to think about it. But if you want, you can turn on paid subscriptions, and then readers can opt to take out a paid subscription. And how you price it, how much you put behind a paywall is up to you as a writer, which we'll get into in a little bit. But I think one question that comes up a lot is, like, if you do want to do this, when is the right time to turn on paid subscriptions? And some people say, oh, you need to build up like a massive free list before you even think about it, so that you've got, a big launch, flashy launch where you can convert loads of people straight away. Some people say do it early. What's your general feeling about that in terms of like, is there a right time? Does it matter?
I think it kind of it depends. We're gonna say that a lot. It depends. One thing it depends on is I do think it's worth thinking upfront a little bit about what you would like your paid model to be, and I think we'll get into the nitty gritty of that in a minute. But if when I first started on Substack with nonfiction, so take that with a grain of salt, but with nonfiction, I turned on paid subscriptions immediately, and I was very clear up front that I was only turning them on because I wanted support only, right? I wasn't going to be adding anything in particular for paid subscribers. There wasn't a bunch of like bonus perks or anything. I was very clear up front that like, it's just if you feel like supporting me, here's how you can do that, but you don't have to. Like, there's no extra fun perks or stuff, That is a perfectly viable way to start. If you want to just turn on paid subscriptions and allow them to be there, I tend to think like, don't make it difficult for people to support you. Like, you might as well turn it on, see what happens, because occasionally you'll get just like some very generous people up front who believe in what you're doing, and they just want to support you, If your plan is to send out extra content for paid subscribers or have a particular strategy, even if you don't know what that is yet, it might be worth holding off initially while you kind of get that a little bit right in your head of what you want that to look like. With Tailbones, which is my fiction newsletter, I had the benefit of a few years on Substack to think about this a little bit. And so I did actually sit down and come up with a strategy for what I wanted for Tailbones, which again, I'm sure we'll get into some of the nitty gritty of that stuff. But I think that would be my initial question for people with paid subscriptions. What do you want that ultimately to look like? If your hope is to set an expectation for extra stuff, you might want to just kind of wait until you've come up with a little bit of at least a skeleton of a plan for that before you turn them on. Otherwise, if you just want to see what happens and see if people will support you, go ahead. There's no downside to turning them on. Like there's just, you might as well,
Yeah, I think that being careful of what you're promising is a really good point, because it can be quite stressful if you from the start are like, oh, paid subscribers get these 5 super cool things every week, let's say, which sounds like a great incentive for people to take out a paid subscription. But the problem, like particularly at the start, is that if you say have 100 free subscribers and you've got 1 paid subscriber, then all of a sudden you're putting in a huge amount of work for one person. And obviously they're important because they're a paid subscriber, so they're supporting you financially. That's a massive deal, but you only have so much time in the week. So if you're having to put all your effort into serving like one person, and then you don't have any time left to do the rest of the newsletter and the main thing, that can be a kind of quite a thorny problem to get into. And then if like down the line you want to change the offering because you found out it's too stressful and too difficult, then that's a complicated thing, because with your free list you can, taking into consideration all the stuff we've talked about in the previous episodes, but you can sort of do whatever you want with it because everyone's subscribed for free. Like there's only a limited amount of complaining they can do, right? But as soon as people are paying you for something, that's a completely different relationship, which certainly made me quite nervous at the start. And I think what you were saying about if you approach it a bit more like a kind of patron arrangement, certainly at the start, if you're just like settling into how you do all this kind of stuff, that helps because they're essentially supporting you as a writer. And inherently, that means they're sort of okay with you doing whatever it is you want to do as a writer. And if they at some point decide that's not for them anymore, they can stop paying and it's all fine. But if you say you're going to get like a book every month or something, and then you can't deliver that, that's then an awkward conversation that you have to have with your subscribers. So yeah, don't overcommit is, I think, what I'm saying there. But yeah, I agree. Otherwise, like, just go for it. I think I turned on paid subscriptions pretty early on. I've been writing for a few months just to try and figure out how Substack worked. This was like 2021. And then I turned it on and absolutely nothing happened. But that was fine. I was kind of like curious about it because I'd previously written all my fiction on Wattpad, where you don't really have, they have a paid thing, but it's super weird and it's invite only. And it's not very good, is the short version. So the idea of being able to just turn on paid subscriptions was intriguing. So I turned it on and, ultimately if nobody decided to take out a paid subscription, didn't really matter. I was going to continue writing anyway. So yeah, but it's a way to start learning how this stuff all slots together. So yeah, I think maybe the next thing is just to emphasize how incredibly slow this stuff is. Or at least that's my experience. I don't know, like maybe you saw like hockey stick AI tech firm level scaling up of your newsletter, but that wasn't my experience.
No, it's very up and down. And if you thought the churn for free subscriptions was was challenging, the churn for paid subscriptions can be challenging too, because
Yes.
obviously it's more obvious when someone unsubscribes from a paid subscription, and it can be a little bit like, okay, all right, that's
It hurts
drop
a bit
in
more.
dollar amount. Yeah, it's kind of like, ooh. And I still think, like we talked about in the last episode, I think it is very important to allow people to come and go. Don't chase people down. Don't ask. I mean,
Knocking
there's
on
no
their door.
reason to ask. Yeah, like it's a bad habit to get into, to start worrying about why people come and go. People have lives to live. People have bills to pay. Sometimes paying, $5 a month for a newsletter just isn't in the budget anymore. And I think it's just, you have to kind of be able to let that go,
Yeah, the most common reason for people to stop paying for a paid subscription has absolutely nothing to do with the writer,
Absolutely.
which is like quite important to try and get your head around it, even though it does hurt a little bit. But it's usually nothing to do with you.
No. And it's normal. I always want to make very clear that like churn is normal. People hop on, people hop off. It's just how it goes. There is no level of newsletter that you can get to where churn will stop happening. If anything, the more you have, the more churn you'll get because there's just more likely to be more people who will leave at any given time. So yeah, just be prepared for churn to happen. Prepare your heart and your soul for that to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if it's useful to talk about the sort of free to paid ratios a little bit. I tried to do some maths earlier, which generally is ill-advisable for me. But I was kind of looking at like what I've had over the years, and like at the moment, I think I'm somewhere around like for every 70 free subscribers, I might get a paid subscriber, and that's like best case scenario, where it's like been going quite well this year for various weird reasons, a lot of which are just random luck, which is again the annoying aspect of trying to help other people do this kind of thing, where there's always going to be sort of components of any success where it's just random stuff that happened, which obviously is quite hard to replicate inherently. But yeah, for the most part, like I've seen more like every 100 free subscribers, I might get a paid subscription. But I don't want to give the impression that that's like a consistent thing. It's like it's up and down all over the place. But the point is, you need a lot of free subscriptions to get paid subscriptions. When it comes to serial fiction in particular, I think it's inherently going to be different if you're doing nonfiction. If you're writing about finances, like how people can invest and save money or something, people are going to pay for that because they're like, yes, I want to know about this. Whereas if you're writing like weird science fiction like me, no one really needs that. Like it's not an essential part of anybody's life, right? So which means you have to take it slow, and it's going to be, that it's not going to be a massive sudden uptick. It's going to be a very slow thing, and you want to get more free people coming through the door who might one day decide to upgrade. And it's not going to be a sudden viral like explosion,
I think Substack works on an ecosystem basis. And I have my pithy little 3 words that I like to use for this, which is, you've got your followers / kind of your lurkers, but followers can be engaged as well. But like followers are interested. When someone follows you, it's because they're interested in what you're doing. They're kind of dipping their toe in the water a little bit. They're just like, your notes are funny, or, I'm intrigued by what you're doing, but I'm not ready to kind of jump in yet. Free subscribers are engaged, right? They're like, I want to give you my email address so that I can be engaged in what you're doing. I can be, receiving that content on a regular basis. Paid subscribers are invested, right? They're like, for whatever reason, whether because I am paying for it, like if it's a paid thing that they have to pay for to read, or I like what you're doing and I want to support you. I am invested in you as a creator. The funny part about that ecosystem, though, is that it's not just like a straight line, like follower becomes subscriber, becomes paid subscriber. They can step backwards, they can spin around, they can do all kinds of things, which is why I think it's always just really helpful to value all 3 of them as much as possible, because they're all part of what you need for a kind of a thriving habitat on your newsletter, right? You need to have all 3, because there will be people who might not be able to keep up with the pace of what you're doing. And so initially they get really excited and they pay for it. And then they go, I can't pay for this anymore. So they step back and maybe they're a subscriber for a little bit. And then maybe they can't receive your emails in their inbox without it overwhelming them. So they step back to being a follower. You know what I mean? Like always have an open door for people to filter through however they need to filter with you, and value all 3 because they're all really important, not just the ones who are paying you, even though, yes, it's good to be grateful for the ones who are paying you because it's really nice, but all 3 are important.
Yeah, and it's just unpredictable. Like you'll have maybe like a 3-month period where everything's going great and you're like, I cracked it. I figured it out. and then after that 3-month period, everything starts going down again, or flat lines, and you're like, I didn't change anything. I literally have no idea what happened here. And again, that comes back to how you can't judge these things on a day-by-day basis or even weekly basis. It's very much like a month timeline, years timeline that we're talking about here, which is quite hard, I think. Like if you're like anyone who's on the live stream who like just joined Substack, who's just made their newsletter, and they're very excited to get going. Like hearing that we're talking about years here can be a bit deflating, I think. And I just looking at the numbers here, like I don't think I had more than 5 paid subscribers for the first like year and a half, and those were all like people I know. It was like nice friends going, "Oh, well done, Simon, off you go." And then like that crept up slowly, but it wasn't really until year 3 that it got into an interesting level where I was like, oh, hang on, this is sort of paying for some of the groceries a little bit. It's like, and there's these different levels where it's like, oh, this paid for me to go to the pub. That's nice.
Yeah.
I can go to the pub once a month, and Substack subscribers made that happen. And then it ticks up a little bit, and you go and buy some milk from the shop and other bits and pieces, and you're like, it's like it's all balancing out. Anyway, hopefully it keeps going that direction, but it's really slow and it takes ages. And I think something I found, I don't know about you or other people in the chat maybe, but the thing I found really hard is that as a writer, I'd never considered making any money. Like I have a day job. That's like how I exist and live, I suppose, and like have a house and things. I'd sort of come to terms with the fact that as a writer, as a fiction author, I was never going to make money because I wasn't really pursuing traditional publishing. Having sort of worked in the sector, not as a writer, but sort of on the other end, I'd seen how hard it was to actually like make any kind of career out of being a writer. Even, people who would be considered very successful writers still have to teach, still have day jobs, still do all these other things around the edge. So I was like, okay, I'm going to forget all about that. I'm just going to write and enjoy it and not even think about like paid stuff. So when people I didn't know started taking out paid subscriptions, it was very odd. And I think there's a dark, this is why I come back to the soul thing I was talking about earlier. It's like a dark moment, like a weird temptation you can get. So, in my case, I put up a video called What Actually Is Substack. And it was like a little 5-minute video that was aimed at fiction writers. This was 2023, I think. And it was just kind of like, this is what Substack is. It's quite useful. And just said some stuff. It did really well. And it's continued to do really well, unexpectedly so. If I was running this as a business, I should probably have stopped writing all my fiction and just made videos about how to use Substack. And if I'd done that, I'd be making loads of money, probably. So I think there's that weird thing where success comes with these odd distractions where you have to decide, right? Am I going to go down the like hustle route and do the internet, make loads of money attempt and hate myself 5 years from now, or am I going to stick with what I'm doing, or is there like somewhere down the middle that combines it? And it's really hard. Like I still sort of wrestle with this a little bit because every like new paid subscriber, I'm like, oh, but if I put more effort in, then maybe I could do more of this writing stuff and less of the day job, and that would be really cool. But then how do I do that without completely betraying the point of what I'm doing? I'm not sure if I'm rambling here, Sally, so I'm going to shut up and see what you think.
No, you're right. Like it is, that really is the kicker for a lot of this, is that there are ways to make money on Substack and to sort of supercharge making money on Substack, but they do come with trade-offs, right? Like they come with trade-offs. They come with sacrifices. And I feel similarly to you in that, when I started Substack, I was kind of taken in by, because back then, the Substack homepage before you sign up had that little calculator that showed you like how many subs you could get and how much money you'd get. And I was like, wow, that sounds awesome. Like, I want to do that. This is back in 2022. And, obviously it hasn't really gone quite that direction, just because that little calculator comes with no caveats about how much time it takes and what it actually takes to build a paid subscriber base. But as a freelancer, because my job is, I'm a writer and an editor for my day job, I see Substack very much like early on. It was just like a fun thing when people started paying. It was like a fun thing, and I was grateful for it, and I was like, oh, this is really cool. And over time, I started realizing, like, oh, you're right. Like, the first time you get a certain amount of money in your account and you go, oh, that just paid for part of a bill, or like, that just helped me to go get some groceries or whatever, it has now become one of my many income streams, lots of small income streams that all kind of build up to my income, right? But it's a part of my income that I really cherish because, yeah, I am grateful that even though I don't have hundreds of paid subscribers, I know that they're paying me for the work that I'm proud of, right? And that means more to me than if I were writing a bunch of stuff that I didn't care about just because I know it'll build paid subscribers. I know that it's something, it's catnip for people that want to pay for that kind of stuff. I am grateful for the number I have, and I'm grateful for it because I know all of those people are there for a particular reason, and it's for my fiction, right? And it's for or to support me in what it is that I'm doing. So yeah, I think that's always a helpful metric. And so you're right, like the soul part of it is important. It really is. It's about how can you feel grateful for what you're being given from people based on what you're willing to put out, like what you're willing to work on. So
yeah, and it's an interesting dynamic. I think, like, as someone who, as an adult, has always had a day job, and in that, I've been lucky in that I've tended to work places which are pretty cool employers and interesting organizations that do interesting stuff, and obviously I want to do a good job in those jobs and like to use my skills and etc. etc. But that kind of employment, you're always you're training yourself to fit into what the organization needs. And the interesting thing, if you can make a newsletter work for yourself, or if you're a YouTube creator or something like that, all of a sudden, yes, there's still a structure. Like for us, it's like Substack has a structure, newsletters and email has a structure, but all of a sudden you're just doing the thing you want to do. And the fact that strangers come along and like pay you a bit for it is really weird. It's lovely, but I still find it quite peculiar. Maybe it's like being British or something. It's kind of like, it's like, oh no, don't do that. No, that's ridiculous. What are you doing that for? But yeah, but it is something quite special. And I think the modern newsletter framework, whether it's Substack or Ghost or Beehive, like, and even things like Patreon, like they've made that relationship and that process so much easier than it ever has been before. The way that writers in our case can go directly to readers, and readers, if they want to, can directly support without that much in between. It's an exciting time to be a writer, even if it is a slow old slog still. And yeah, so I think the next point, and we've said before, both of us have a slightly sort of hybrid model in terms of what we write. So we have our fiction, that's like our passion and the thing we love to do, but we also have non-fiction in some capacity that's kind of associated or linked or exists as a thing alongside. And in my experience, the reality of paid subscriptions is that it's a lot easier if you have a non-fiction component on the side. Certainly in my case, that's what I found. In looking at stats, as far as I'm aware, like most people read both of my stuff. They read the fiction and the non-fiction. But I think a lot of people show up because of the non-fiction and then find the fiction and like, oh, what's this? And go and check it out. And because of what I write, they sort of support each other. They're sort of evidence for the other thing. And I think what we're saying in this episode today goes hand in hand with what we did last time, which is in terms of finding audiences, like all the stuff we talked about in terms of finding audiences applies also to paid audiences and trying to figure out like what you can offer and what you want to offer. And yeah, I guess the two things I'm saying is I've found having a non-fiction component to be extremely useful in reaching new audiences, but I would also say only do that if you actually want to write that stuff as well, which I do in my case. I enjoy writing that kind of stuff immensely. But yeah, I think I wouldn't advise anyone to do it just as a way, like as a magnet, as some kind of tactical thing, because it's all time that you're not going to get back.
Yeah. Yeah. When you know, I spent maybe 10 seconds thinking about with Tailstack News, which is my, bulletin board of fiction announcements, about whether there should be any kind of paid component to it. And I ultimately decided no, because I knew that I enjoyed making it for free. And for me, it's like just part of the fun of it being a resource for everybody is that like, no, if you pay for it, doesn't mean you get like a special treatment or whatever, like I think there's ways that I could have monetized it that I just chose not to because it didn't feel right to me. But yeah, when I tried to decide on my paid model for Tailbones, I was coming off of several years before Substack, way before Substack. I had a Patreon. And of course, I wasn't posting fiction publicly or anything, but I had like some essays that I wanted to write and stuff. And I had, not like a lot of people, but I had more than I expected paying for my Patreon. And I wasn't able to keep up the cadence at all. And I had a couple months where people were paying me for nothing. And I felt so guilty. I felt so guilty. I ended up refunding them and like shutting down my Patreon. And I just had this like horrible experience. And I felt just really ashamed of it for a while after that. Um, Looking back on it, I was probably harder on myself than I needed to be, but still, I didn't like the idea of taking people's money under false pretenses. I'd made this promise of what I was going to do. So when I decided to do Tailbones and have a paid model, one of the first things I decided was I am not going to necessarily add extra content as a paid perk unless unless I'm really clear with people about what I'm going to be adding. Instead, I'm going to paywall my archive. So that is one model that we probably are going to talk about of like there's various ways to do this. I chose that I split my publishing year into 3-month seasons. So while the season is happening, everything's free while I'm, it's like, short stories, whatever serial it is, it's all free to read during that season. When the season ends, that serial goes behind a paywall, and maybe a couple short stories from that season might go behind the paywall, and then it's only accessible to my paid subscribers. And that's kind of the way I did it for quite a long time with Tailbones, it was just that. It was just a paywalled archive. Since then, I've added a few more things as far as like now that I've got some self-published books. My paid subscribers can have signed books from me. Like that's kind of, they are the pool that I'll send a signed book to. Things like that, discounts. Everyone gets a discount on my merch shop and stuff as their paid subscriber, things like that. But for a long time, it was just the archive. And that for me was the ticket for being able to keep up with that and feel good about that, because it was like, okay, it's not something I have to be responsible for adding more things. And I've had feedback from people who pay for subscriptions that people's inboxes are really full these days. And not every paid subscriber is in it for more stuff, like for more content, for more emails. It's like, it's kind of a lot. So, yeah, that's one thing I would encourage is don't necessarily think that a paid subscription has to be about perks and adding things. Sometimes it can be about just making the things you already have more valuable in other ways. So.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think like over delivering can feel like the obvious thing to do for paid subscribers, but aside from the the impact on your own resources and time, you're also then taking up more time of those paying subscribers. And actually, in a weird way, being sent loads of paid exclusives you don't have time to actually read can end up feeling like worse value than if you weren't getting them in the first place. So yeah, it's all slightly more complicated than it might at first seem. Something else you mentioned as well, like when you're on Patreon and you couldn't keep up and then you refunded people, that's a really important point, because if you only have free subscribers, so if you don't turn on paid, like what's the worst that can happen? Basically, like the worst that can happen is some free subscribers unsubscribe if they decide they don't want to read it anymore.
Right.
Like, never mind. As soon as you start taking people's money, it changes completely. And it could all be completely fine, and like hopefully people are nice and reasonable and they know what they're doing and it's all okay. But you will inevitably at some point get into a refund situation, which could be for all sorts of weird reasons. You'll get chargebacks, which are the worst, where people for some reason pay and then issue like a fraudulent chargeback request from their bank. So rather than going to the writer and saying, "Oh, I made a mistake, can I have a refund, please?" They go straight to the bank and say, "This person took money from my account." And you can fight it if you want, but even if you fight it, you still end up owing fees to Stripe being Substack's payment provider. So as the creator, you lose either way. Or you can just accept it and be like, "No, I'll just write that off." But the point is, you end up in annoying financial complications, which I don't want to make it out like this happens all the time, but it does happen. So the easiest way, like if that sounds like a horrendous time to anyone watching, like the easiest way to not have that is to not turn on paid subscribers. So yeah, it's just something to bear in mind. And the thing that I've found as my newsletter has grown sort of above a particular threshold is that people can get really confused on the internet. So I've had people in the past who wanted to read my stuff, but maybe took out a paid subscription by accident, and they're like, "Oh, I didn't mean to do that," or something like that. In which case, fair enough. But I've had a handful of people now who have subscribed with a paid subscription, so they've clicked on the paid option, gone through, put in their credit card details, gone through. Substack actually has quite a convoluted subscription process. You have to click through a load of things. They've done all that, gone, yeah, sure, yep, here's my credit card, yep, and then they've got like the welcome email, or seen like their bank balance, and they're like, "What the hell is this?" And I'm like, "But anyway, this has happened numerous times, and it's very confusing. I don't know how these people do it. It's kind of clarified to me in some ways how like scams can work so well, because like the completely ludicrous email scams that we all get from time to time, and you read it and you're like, how could this ever work on anybody? And then when you're offering a paid thing, you suddenly notice that people are sort of quite capable of scamming themselves, even if it's a legitimate product they're looking at. Anyway, so yes, people can be a bit weird. Money is complicated and unpleasant. So it's just something to bear in mind, because you have to navigate around that stuff one way or another.
Yeah. And one way I would say, like, you can't entirely prevent that from happening, because it's happened to me. It's happened to Simon. It happens. It's normal, unfortunately. But I would say one way that you can, at least do your due diligence to curtail some of that, is to be as clear as possible with what a paid subscription looks like for, it, just make it very clear when you're making the ask of what a paid, to sign up for paid subscriptions, to say, here's what you get for being a paid subscriber. If it's just support only, be very clear about that. Thank you for supporting me. That's all you're going to get. You're not going to have any extra stuff in your inbox. But yeah, regardless, there's going to be people who are just going to breeze right past that. There will be no reading comprehension. They're just going to sign up by accident. So yeah, but don't let that scare you off from turning on paid subscriptions. It does not happen that often. It's just often enough to be annoying,
Yes, exactly. So I want to get on to the different types of paid models, because you mentioned like auto archiving. So we'll get on to that. But just before then, I just wanted to mention one weird anecdote that I have, which kind of I think represents or illustrates how strange the newsletter game can be, which was that, when would it have been? Late 2024, I think it was October, November. I started seeing this massive uptick in free subscribers and then paid subscribers as well. And I couldn't understand what's going on. I was like, this is amazing. What's happening here? And it precisely overlapped with the US election. I don't write about politics at all. Like, I have politics in my stories and stuff, but I don't obviously write about politics. But I do have, like, what is Substack? I have tutorials on how to use Substack, like the video we're doing now. So my best theory was that during that kind of tumultuous time, and when social media was kind of going completely nuts, people were migrating from various other platforms, coming to Substack. They were maybe seeing political or hearing about political writing, seeing Substack quoted in newspapers, on the TV, that kind of thing. And then they were like, what's Substack? So they go to Google, type in, what is Substack? And end up on my newsletter, and maybe find the video useful and subscribe. And then, like, a couple of weeks later, I send them the latest chapter of Tales from the Triverse, and they're like, what's this? This is strange. So yeah, it's just, and I saw this massive spike, and the next month it went down, and like the actual curve just, you can see it just carried on, and there's just this weird, like, Trump bump, basically. Very weird. So it's just an example of how there's these, like, random factors, things you can't account for, that will happen. And a lot, because those were paid subscribers, it was quite a weird, stressful time, because I didn't know what the hell was going on.
That is funny.
Yes. I'm not even American. I'm not even in America. It was very confusing. Right. So yes, paid models. So you've turned on the paid option. People can pay to subscribe. In terms of how you do that, it's quite variable. It doesn't matter what newsletter system you're using. I think they all offer these kind of mixture of things. And I've tried quite a few of them, mostly with not that much success, but it depends a lot on what it is you're offering. So the one you mentioned already is the archive. So this is a thing you can do on Substack where you say, after a certain amount of time, posts then become paywalled. So they're free when they go out, when you send them out in the first place, and then they end up behind a paywall after, it could be whatever, it could be a week, it could be a month. I actually have mine set up to be 6 months. So everything is free for quite a long time, but then anything older than 6 months is behind the paywall, and people have to pay to access the back catalogue, essentially. A bit like, I think you were saying, like, I found that to be a nice balance, because if I'm writing stuff that I hope is going to help writers, I'm not very comfortable with paywalling it all up front, because, as we're discussing right now, most writers don't make much money. So it doesn't quite feel right. So I like the balance of putting everything out for free, so literally everyone can access it, including people who, low income or students or what have you. But then there's also this high value back catalogue, because I've been writing the newsletter for 5 years now, so that paid subscribers do actually get something, like, quite tangible. It makes sense in my head. It feels nice.
Yeah. Frankly, I'm a big believer of the whole archive, especially for fiction stuff. I'm not saying it's the only way. It's clearly not the only way, but I think it's a great way to reward your biggest fans, right? Because the people who decide to pay to read your work are potentially going to be people who are going to want to read more from you. So it'll feel good to them that they're able to go behind the curtain and read all this other stuff, And, like, I do have a couple of resources that are also behind the paywall that are, like, exclusive resources for the world that I've built and stuff like that. I'll be honest with you, I don't know how much my paid subscribers care about that. I think I have had more success with paid subscribers loving the fact that they can read some of these past serials, and, like, even when those serials have been turned into books and stuff like that, they still have access to the original, the first drafts, right? Which is pretty cool. Like, they get to see kind of how the sausage was made, essentially. And so, yeah, I think the archive system, I really think is pretty cool. But Yeah, and I also think it's great because, as I'm sure we'll get to, another way you can do it is to paywall stuff, right up front. The problem with that is if you are brand new and no one's read your writing before, how will they know they want to pay you for it if they don't know whether they like it? And I think that's what's cool about an archive is that it allows you to post free fiction. It allows you to post this stuff so that it's almost like having a business card. Like you've got all these business cards out there of people reading these things and going, oh, I really like that. I wonder if she has a more like that somewhere else. And then they go to your library and they see, oh, there's all this stuff. Maybe I should pay a certain amount a month to access this archive, So I think it can work out really nicely for fiction writers, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, definitely. And Scoot in the chat made a good point, as he tends to, when he's not making like amazing jokes. But his point is that if you go the archive route, it becomes more and more useful and valuable to subscribers the more that you continue writing. So obviously, as a tactic, if you're just starting out, it doesn't really work because you don't actually have an archive yet. But I do a 6-month auto archive, which I think is quite generous. But the reason that works is because I've been writing the newsletter for 5 years. So even giving 6 months of stuff away completely for free, there's still a ton of stuff in the archive. So yeah, it works nicely. Flipping it the other way around, the other thing you can do is an early access kind of model, which again, I think Substack has that functionality built in. So when you publish a post, you can set it to unlock after a certain amount of time. I don't think I'm inventing that. It didn't exist back when I actually did early access, so I had to go back and edit posts to unlock them, and that was a nightmare. But I think you can do it automatically now. So, I mean, I think everyone knows like how early access works conceptually. If you've got something that is in high demand, then that could definitely work. Like people can read the next chapter a week, a month, whatever, before everyone else. For me, I've always found it fiddly, partly because of what you were saying. Like if you don't have that many readers yet, as soon as you paywall something, even if it's going to unlock, it just means no one's around to read it, and it becomes hard to promote it. And then you have to promote it again when it unlocks, and it all just gets a bit complicated. But yeah, it depends what you're doing. It could be that it makes a lot of sense depending on the type of thing that you're writing. And obviously for like big name writers, that's going to make a huge amount of sense because then their big fans will go in there to read it before everyone else.
Yeah, and
I don't know. Have you ever?
Oh, sorry.
No, carry on. I was literally about to say, what do you think?
Oh yeah, no, I think yeah. Another thing that is something worth thinking about is if you're brand new and you're still feeling a little bit hesitant about sharing your work too, I could see how the exclusivity might make you feel better if you have like a small number of paid subscribers and you just want to send things out to a small group and like, I get that too. I think, but just remember, like you said, it is harder to promote something when it's behind a paywall. I've had people over time who've sent me, announcements on Tailstack News for serials that they've just launched. And I go to the serial to look at it and it's behind a paywall already. Like it's just, it's just started posting and it's already behind a paywall. And my worry is that it's like, how many people are going to take it on faith to start reading if it's already behind the paywall? Not as many as you might want. So just bear that in mind that if the goal is exclusivity, that's great. If you're hoping that it will be enough of a carrot to get people to pay, you have to have enough evidence already on your newsletter for people to, you want people to get to know you first as far as what your writing is, whether they think they'll like it, because people don't pay for stuff necessarily just sight unseen. They want a recommendation. They want a review. They want to be able to read the first chapter of something. You know what I mean? So, yeah. So I think just be aware of that if you're going to paywall something right out of the gate, you might not have as much engagement or any engagement initially. If, just depends.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So, yeah, I think the other thing, aside from early access, you can obviously just make a post completely paywalled from the start forever. Or you can paywall it at a certain point within the post. So, quite often you'll see non-fiction posts where it does the intro, it gets you interested in the topic, and then just as it gets to the really good stuff, it paywalls it. I'm sure it's an extremely effective tactic. I find it extremely irritating myself.
Yeah, I personally don't. It has never prompted me to pay personally, but I'm sure there are people who do. It's just, it just frustrates me usually.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. What you can do is where you stick in a paywall, if it's clearly a different type of thing underneath. So if it's, you've got the main bulk of the post, and then below the paywall, you've got like behind the scenes stuff or extra notes for paid subscribers, but it's not essential to what's above the paywall. That I think can be less annoying and potentially a bit more of an incentive. One thing to note on Substack, if you put in a paywall, it will lock comments to paid subscribers. So even if you wanted to keep comments open for everyone, you can't do that as soon as a paywall is in the post. Don't really know why they have that limitation. It's very annoying.
Well, and also the little label at the top will say paid. And so you might get some free subscribers who will get confused and they will think that they can't access the post because it says paid in purple at the top. So just be aware that, I think something I've, this is coming from my own personality, because I get frustrated easily by paywalls in places that I'm not expecting them to be when I'm engaging with stuff. My ethos that I set for myself early on was that I wanted free subscribers to have a fully, like a satisfying experience on Tailbones without ever having to pay a dime, and for everything else to be bonus. So I never wanted people to bump up against a paywall and have it frustrate their experience. Like, I want you to have a satisfying experience for free forever if that's what you want. Go deeper if you'd like, right? That was personally my ethos, because I find frustration is not a good motivator for paying people. That said, again, clearly it works, because there are people who do that and it works. So just be aware. Again, I think it comes down to the trust thing, building trust with your subscribers. If that's something that you do a lot, where you set paywalls in certain places, people will come to expect that, and you'll have people who are fine with that and who are along for the ride with you. I think just this is where consistency can be helpful. If you're kind of randomly doing that at various times and kind of mixing up the paywalls in ways that are confusing, it might start to lose people, especially if they're used to reading your fiction in a certain way, or they're used to engaging with your stuff in a certain way, and suddenly they're hitting paywalls and they're like, you weren't doing that before. Why are we doing this now? So just be aware that a paywall is not necessarily an automatic magnet for people to pay. It doesn't always work like that.
Yeah, and I think we've said in previous installments of this series that you're constantly cultivating your audience, and if you, as you say, if you have paywalls halfway down your posts, then you'll be attracting readers who are okay with that, or if they become paying subscribers, like they quite like that, and maybe they like an exclusive comments area where only the paying people can comment. I'm not going to cast any judgment on that or people that do it, but that is creating a certain kind of community. Whereas if you have comments that are always open to everyone, and doesn't matter if you're a paid subscriber or a free subscriber, everyone can contribute to a discussion, that's creating a different kind of community. Which one people want to go for, up to them, but it's just something to consider, because it will probably change the vibe a bit. At the same time, though, because I think it's pretty obvious which one I prefer. But there's a wrinkle in that, which is that if you're writing something that is really sensitive, potentially controversial, if you're in a minority that's frequently targeted by horrible internet people, like paywalling either an entire article or the comments can enhance the quality of the conversation, basically, and act as a kind of safety mechanism. So yeah, it has an interesting kind of secondary role in that way as well.
Yeah.
So I think we've covered most of the kind of options certainly in terms of Substack and how you can do it. But the last one is I find the least intuitive but really important one, which is just to make everything free all the time. So when I started the newsletter, I tried early access, I tried bonus content, I tried doing paywall below the fold. I tried all sorts of things, and none of it really worked, but it was also slightly annoying from an admin perspective, and it just didn't quite make sense, basically. So I got to a certain point where I was like, no, I'm just going to make everything free. And so for the whole of the 4.5 years I was doing Triverse, I had a couple of paywalled specific posts, but basically everything was free. And what I found was that as soon as I made everything free, went out for free, stayed free, people started paying to subscribe, even though they weren't getting anything. When there were obvious perks and paywalled stuff, like nobody really took out paid subscriptions. As soon as everything was free, these people started showing up and paying. And it was very confusing. Completely confounded me and went against most of what I'd learned working around comms and marketing in the day job. But I think that was when I twigged that in the newsletter land, people don't really subscribe for a product in a lot of cases anyway. And certainly in cases of fiction writers, I think it's not like they're buying a book, which is what I thought they were doing. What they're actually doing is going more down the patron model, where they find a writer and they're like, oh, I like this writer for whatever reason. I'm going to subscribe and support them for a bit and for however long they want to. And attracting people who might do that is a lot easier if everything is actually free, because you just get more people through the door. And that ultimately seemed to make a lot more sense.
Yep. Yeah. I think something I read early on in my Substack journey, I don't even remember where I read it now, but was that on Substack, you are the niche, right? The writer is the niche. Because there's all, a lot of ballyhoo about, niche down, you got to make sure you pick a niche. And it's like, well, honestly, especially with fiction, you as the writer, your voice, your unique view, your unique fiction, you are the niche. And so it can be easy to get into the weeds about value and worth and, all these different things about like, what is it, how much should these things cost and all these things. Ultimately, it's going to come down to you're never going to be able to force people to pay for what you're giving them. Like the value is going to be determined by them and by what they want to be able to contribute and what they're able to contribute for the entertainment that they receive from reading your work. And also, I just think there are some people who they see an indie writer, especially on Substack with fiction and stuff. They see that and they go, I want to be part of this. Like, I want to be part of this thing that this person is building. And so they're not even really all that. They're not paying you market value for your stories. They're paying you for that element of support and that element of being part of something, being part of a groundswell of, I've discovered this writer on Substack and I really like what they're doing, So yeah, it can be challenging in that sense that like when you think about having everything be free, it's like, well, then why would they pay? Like, what are they paying for? And it's like, well, they're paying for the community. They're paying for the opportunity to be part of something. And that's why, like what we talked about in our last episode about growing an audience and growing a community, that's where all of that stuff can come back to really be a benefit is if you're showing up and you're, sharing and you're being visible among your readers and you're showing them that you're grateful for them and you're grateful for being part of this audience, then like, yeah, you're going to find there are people who are just, they're not going to pay for content. There's that word again. They want to pay for you or like for what you're doing. And ultimately that's the dream, right? Like, sure, we'd all like to, sell hundreds of books a year and, I don't know, maybe we don't all want that, but there's all kinds of things we might want out of this. But the dream is to have someone look at you and say, I want to support you because I like the cut of your jib, you know? So yeah.
Yeah. So it's them saying, carry on, keep doing that thing.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, like you mentioned, like it'd be nice to sell hundreds of books all the time. But the thing with book sales, from what I've observed, is that you release a book. Hope if you're lucky and if it all goes really well, you sell loads at launch. I'm not just talking self-publishing. I'm talking like traditional publishing. Like if you get it out through a major publisher, and then sales will drop off over time. It might go out of print at some point, but there's going to be fallow years until you make another book, and then hopefully that gets published by a publisher, or you self-publish that one and then you start again. It's not a very good business model. It's not.
No.
It's not a particularly viable way to like make a living, because it's so dependent on you like finishing books, which is really hard to do on a consistent, regular basis, unless you just churn them out for like the Amazon machine or something, which is a whole other thing. And the subscription model, where you do have people who are less about like buying a book and more about supporting what you're doing just in general, it's quite an interesting shift for writers and any creative type person, because suddenly it is an income. It's like a regular part of your income every month, which even for fairly successful writers, unless you're really at the top tier, like that's not something that most writers get like traditionally have experienced particularly easily. Hence, in between books, they have to work all sorts of day jobs and stuff, unless they're especially successful. So the fact that it's a lot easier, not easy, but it's a lot easier to create a kind of foundational financial safety net, if in a way, as a writer, like just by doing the writing that you want to do.
Yeah.
I find that like immensely hopeful and optimistic. And all the other modes of publishing still exist, but this way of kind of building a following, whether it's on Patreon or through a newsletter or what have you, it feels like a really important shift that we maybe still haven't quite grappled with, like culturally, or as a society. Like I don't quite know what it means, but it feels important. I just can't quite explain it.
I think it's a pendulum swing away from, I like to call it like we're each building our own little campfires, right? we're each building our own little campfires that people can sit around and we can tell stories to each other. There's a constant pendulum swing of purchasing institutionalized art versus purchasing indie art. And I'm not saying that they fully go away when the pendulum's swinging one way or the other, but it's more like I think there's a lot of people who really want to know who their artists are. They want, I mean, that's why people go to craft fairs. That's why, like,
Yeah.
not to get into the weeds on this, but like, that's why AI can be so offensive to people for a good reason, is because it's hard to know who my artist is. I want to know who made this. And so the switch to a subscription model very much takes the focus away from the result, buying a book, which is a product that has been made, and puts it back on, I'm supporting the process. I'm supporting this artist's process, whatever that looks like to them, And I think it's exciting. I think it's also, it's something worth focusing on when you're thinking about getting paid, is that to kind of switch your brain out of this idea that I need people to pay for the results of what I'm doing, and instead just I need to focus on what I can do to stay consistent and show up for my art, and people will respond, hopefully in kind, by supporting me in that endeavor. It's a different lens, I guess.
Yes, yeah, I agree, and I think it's only going to become more important as well with the arrival of AI, and like not even to get into like the pros and cons and whether someone likes or dislikes AI, but yeah, the kind of shift away from the end product, which all of a sudden, like creating an end product is abruptly extremely easy.
Yeah.
Like whether it's any good or not is a separate matter, but it's always been very hard to make a thing, whereas now it's trivially simple, but actually the process is the bit that has always been the most important bit, but was kind of not obvious because we all bought books or we bought tickets to go to a movie or listen to an album, or the thing at the end became the all important thing when actually the process, like, that's just a reflection. It's a consequence of the process bit, which is what makes it, for a lot of people, makes it relevant and interesting, because that is what's connecting you to the people that made the thing.
Yeah.
And as you say, like newsletters, subscription based connections between readers and writers exposes that process in a really interesting, ongoing way, which I think is a useful counterpoint to the way some of the tech stuff is going. And we don't really know how that's all going to converge and mix or not mix down the line, but I think it's an important thing for artists to have in their toolkit, so they can demonstrate that they're actually doing stuff. Yes. Okay. Next topic, because we're running a bit long here. Turns out we have a lot to say on this. Just sort of briefly in terms of pricing. So, because you can set whatever prices you want. I've seen some newsletters where it's like mad pricing, not fiction so much, but some of the kind of how-to or financial stuff or tech journals are so expensive. Whereas I've basically set my newsletter prices as low as I can set them. And I did that ages ago, and I haven't really returned to it or thought too much about whether that was a good idea or not. I think for me, it came down to the fact that I just wanted to make it as easy as possible for anyone who might want to support me or who might want to access the archive, to make the barrier there as low as possible. Which, if I was more mercenary or more business minded, I might not have done it like that. What's your kind of, because obviously you work professionally as a freelance editor, so you maybe have a better handle on the value of your own work than I do. I don't know. Like, what's your thinking there?
I don't know about that. Wouldn't go that far. Yeah. So when I first started with Tailbones, I started. There's no point in being coy. I started with monthly subscriptions were $2.50, and for those who don't know this, yes, Substack has a minimum of $5, but you can use the discount feature. There's in the settings for paid subscriptions, you can use the discount feature to permanently set a discount, 50% discount. So you can set it at whatever you want. I just happened to set it at 50% off. So everyone who signed up in those early days, and that's locked in, by the way. So if you raise the rate, that's still what they signed up at is the rate that they pay. So my earliest subscribers still pay, $2.50 a month. And I have raised it a couple of times over the years, and I've now topped it out at $5. I'm up to the Substack minimum now, and the only reason I raised it was as I started adding more things to the archive, it started feeling more like I can feasibly charge $5 a month for what I am now offering. I have multiple serials back there. I have all this short fiction back there. I have all these different things. It just felt like, and especially too, my paid subscribers also get a discount on my editing stuff. So it kind of felt like, I wanted to make sure it all balanced out some way. But yeah, so I think, again, it's going to come down to what you feel comfortable charging, how much you're able to offer, and then ultimately just having the confidence to know that whatever you charge, basically like standing by what you've chosen to charge. Because if you're going to charge $10 a month, then just know that not everyone's going to jump on board for $10 a month. Like, if what you're looking for is, again, a very exclusive group of people who are willing to pay that much a month, okay, well, just bear in mind that's going to be an exclusive group, depending on what you're able to offer, right? I think, yeah, when it comes to pricing, I also, though, want to encourage writers to be a little more confident about pricing, because I think sometimes we tend to err the opposite direction. I know I'm bad at this. I tend to err the opposite direction for what I charge for things, because I'm kind of like, well, who would pay that? And it's like, you don't know who would pay that. That's the entire point. You kind of have to find a sweet spot of maybe charging a little bit more than you think you're quote unquote worth, while also not going so far overboard that you're going to chase some people away because they're going to go, I don't know if I can justify that cost. But yeah, I mean, again, it's okay to experiment with these things. It's okay to try a rate and see what happens, and then maybe after see if you get quite a lot of people jumping on at that price, maybe you can raise it in a little bit. I don't know. It's like, it's okay to, as long as you're clear in your communication with your subscribers. I'm always big on that. Want to make sure you're very clear with people about what's going to happen. Again, if they jump on at a certain rate, that rate's not going to change if you raise it, so you don't have to worry about that. But make sure you tell people that so that they're not worried that you're going to raise your rates on them. But yeah, it's okay to kind of find your sweet spot and sort of try a few things first, and to be confident enough in what kind of output you're able to do, to be able to charge concurrent with that,
Yeah, I think my worry when I was doing Tales from the Triverse every week and putting it all out for free, which for how I've outlined it, made sense because it was the best way to get readers, and it seemed to also then get people to pay, even though they weren't getting anything. But my worry was that I was not so much undervaluing my work, but setting a precedent that no one could charge for fiction. So I think that's always been a problem. Not that I thought I was like a trendsetter, but the more writers put things out for free, then the more there is pressure for everyone to put their stuff out for free, and then suddenly it's a race to the bottom, and no one can make any money. I think it helped when I shifted from thinking of it as people buying a book to the more patron model. It then made more sense. But yeah, it is a tricky thing, and I think valuing your own work, whatever that may mean, is really important. But yeah, and I think there's an interesting, like Substack in particular, but I think also Ghost and the other ones, and some of the completely independent newsletters that have been going for ages. There's been an interesting shift, because I think if you went back 10 years, 15 years, the idea that people would be subscribing to newsletters, like paying to subscribe to newsletters at all, would seem mad, because everything on the internet was free. And it was all about ad-supported stuff. That's how the internet worked. So the idea that like just normal people would choose to pay to subscribe to stuff, like maybe they'd pay to subscribe to the New Yorker, which for some reason is always the example people use for these things. But subscribing to a single writer would seem completely nuts. Like, no one's going to do that. That's shifted in the last 5 years, where it now seems like quite a normal thing to do. There's still interesting open questions about like how much can that grow and scale. Like everyone has a maximum. Like subscribing to one writer is pretty cheap. Subscribing to 5 suddenly starts to get quite expensive. So there's interesting quirks to the system, but it does feel like the discussion and the way people accept value in writing has actually changed in the last sort of half decade since newsletters. And I don't want to give Substack too much credit, but I think the way they've done stuff and the fact that they've brought in so many high profile writers does seem to have reminded people that writing is like quite cool and worth valuing in that way.
Yeah. And I think that the tools they've added over time have helped with that as well, where, now you can be a writer and also do live streams, and you can like interact with your audience in ways that are unique, that you didn't have in other places. So yeah, I think they have upped the value simply by giving writers easier access to some of these tools. And so you can keep everything within the ecosystem of Substack, instead of, over here you have to have this live stream program, and over here you have to have YouTube, and over here you have to have, like now it's all here, so you can, it's a lot easier to charge for the whole kind of breadth of all the things that a writer is able to offer to their audience. Again, no, people don't have to use that if they don't want to. All the tools are optional, but it's just that it's good to know that they're there. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Let's skip along a little bit. I think we've mentioned, other platforms are available. Obviously, there's lots of newsletter platforms which are all pretty good these days. Patreon is well established, and they seem to be rolling out more and more features to sort of catch up with Substack. I think the competition in that sort of creator space is proving to be quite healthy. So they're making it easier to hopefully find Patreons, and they're taking a slightly more newslettery approach from what I've seen. There's other things like Ko-fi and Buy Me a Coffee and some of those systems. The only thing I'd say is that getting people to jump around different platforms is almost impossible. It's really hard. So, if people are reading you over here on your newsletter and then you want them to go over here to subscribe to Patreon or go over here to do the coffee thing or whatever, that's really difficult. If you're on Patreon, you should try and put your content out through Patreon and get your followers there. If you're doing a newsletter through Substack or Ghost, get people to subscribe there. Just make it as simple as possible, basically.
Yeah. I don't have necessarily experience with this in particular, but I know that I've heard some people say that they're kind of cross-posting on other platforms just to kind of, make sure that their eggs are in various baskets just in case something happens or whatever, which I think there's wisdom in that. But I would say, yeah, I would agree with you that audience building should happen in one place as much as possible, because if you're scattering everything, it is going to be more complicated to try and figure out how to communicate with everyone. But yeah, not a bad idea to, have your eye on other platforms if you need to. I personally don't right now, but I think it's not bad praxis to do that. But at the same time, yeah, if you're trying to build audiences on multiple platforms, that is going to take a lot of time and energy and
yes.
effort. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Some other interesting wrinkles. So there's no ads on Substack. There's no built-in ad system, whether that's for writers to use or Substack themselves. I think this is a major part of why Substack has remained a pretty good platform in terms of writing and reading. Doesn't take you have to be like a tech expert to identify ads as being the reason a lot of the other platforms are not nice, or just don't really work anymore. But they are experimenting. Substack's experimenting with sponsorships at the moment, which is an interesting thing. So you can DIY sponsorships at the moment. So if you write about writing, you might want to see if the people who make Scrivener are going to sponsor you or something like that. That would be an obvious, natural thing to do. It's something I've always thought I should do and have never actually done. But they're building in features now to sort of enable higher profile sponsorships. I've poked at it a little bit. I think it's in sort of early beta at the moment, so it's not rolled out to everyone. But it's quite interesting. At the moment, it's a very limited list of companies you can link with. So it's like Uber and T-Mobile and Polymarket. And I'm like, I don't want to be associated with any of these companies. But theoretically, if it expands out to more relevant companies that are not trying to destroy society, that could be an interesting extra thing for writers to investigate that is not too intrusive. So the point there, I suppose, is this whole thing is evolving all the time. If we come back in a year and do this exact same live stream, we'd probably be talking about all sorts of different things. So we did on our notes have a whole section of talking about print and ebooks and merch and taking the newsletter content and putting it out into the world in other forms. As a plot twist, I don't know what you think, Sally. I feel like because we've already been going for over an hour here,
I keep looking at
maybe
the clock going,
I know. Is that a surprise part 6 of this series? I think it might be. Because that's a whole discussion that we could get into, and I don't want to rush it.
We're at in 10 minutes, unfortunately. So
yes, exactly. So yeah, I think we'll probably wrap it up there for today. Hopefully that was useful. like all this stuff, there's not really any quick fixes and get rich quick schemes if you want to actually just write good fiction and not hate yourself at the end of the day. But if you just write the stuff that you like to write and have a lot of patience, these days it can turn into something quite interesting. That's been my experience.
Yeah, I would say have the confidence to put yourself out there, have the confidence to think that people might want to support you, have the confidence to just give things a try, experiment, right? I think we can get really hung up on how serious the whole money and financial aspect of it can be, because it can be kind of scary when it comes down to dollar amounts. But Substack is the perfect place to play and to try and to just see what clicks, you know? So, yeah, let yourself be the niche. Let yourself be someone worthy of being supported, and just, understand that it's not going to be instantaneous, but as long as you're going to play the long game, good things can happen.
Exactly. And just before we finish, I just wanted to address a couple of questions I spotted in chat. So Michael asked about like putting in buy me a coffee links, and whether that potentially dilutes the possibility of readers like actually subscribing to your newsletter. What do you think? You're shaking your head.
I have a tip jar on all of my posts. It occasionally gets used. It's just through PayPal. I have like a PayPal link. It occasionally gets used, but I have not noticed any. Don't make it difficult for people to pay you. That's just my philosophy on that. If some people just want to throw you $5 for a particular newsletter post, great. Yeah, it's not going to make any difference and as Goot said, I think right after that, like someone who's a habitual donator might at some point say, you know what, I should just pay to subscribe. This is silly. So yeah.
It's interesting because my instinct, because I don't have a tip jar type setup, my instinct would be that it could confuse matters by giving people too many options. But I think it probably depends on how you present it and how you interface it. So, if you get to a certain point in a newsletter and it's like, buy me a coffee, go to my Patreon, subscribe to my newsletter, and then the reader's like, oh my God, what am I supposed to do here? Whereas, if it's just like it pops up occasionally in a natural way, and then otherwise they can just subscribe, you want to keep it simple at all times. But options are fine as long as you don't overload people with them. And then last point, I can't remember who said it. There's too many comments, which is lovely. But someone said right at the start that like a nice goal to have would be to have enough paid subscribers for it to then enable you to pay for an editor, for example, or for a cover designer. And I think that was a really great point. Like if you can get to a point where the income from your writing is then you can put it back into your writing in some way, that's a great position to be in. And I've recently managed to get to a point where for my next serial, I am actually working with a cover designer, which is cool because I've always DIY'd it myself, which has been great fun. But like the opportunity to work with an actual another artist, and like a professional who can do a cover is amazing, and that's only possible because of the generous people who paid to subscribe to my newsletter. So that little feedback loop of like the art and then readers supporting it, and then that going and supporting someone else's skills, that feels quite virtuous and nice.
Yeah, and I would say too, along with that, again, I'm not trying to add this to someone as a pressure of something you have to do, but something to consider is that it can be nice when you start making a certain amount of money from Substack to then pour that back into writers that you care about also on Substack. Because I know I had that experience too, where I reached a certain level where I felt like, okay, I have enough that I feel happy about kind of paying back, and I think people do that automatically, but I think it can also just be a good thing to remember that it can feed on itself. Gratitude and what am I trying to say? Generosity feeds generosity. So it's always it's a good idea.
Exactly. Right. We will park it there. We will be back with a part 6 unexpectedly.
We'll be back.
That'll be the final part, probably. Let's think of something else.
Who knows?
Yes. Exactly. Right. Well, thank you everyone for showing up and chatting away in the chat and all the questions. The replay of this will go up on Monday. And yeah, thanks again. Thanks, Sally. And
Thank you.
see you at the next one.
Yeah.